I was standing
He
right
is
there
just
in my
becoming
own living room
impossible to deal
when my
with.
daughter whispered,
I know, I
"He's
don't know what to
becoming
do anymore.
impossible,
They
just
know
so
we were there,
difficult to
David.
deal with."
What are we gonna
My
do?
son didn't even look at me. He just nodded like it was the most obvious truth in the world. And maybe the worst part, a small part of me had started to believe them. But in my trembling
I didn't want to
hands
worry you,
was a
but the
medical
doctor
report I
confirmed
had
it.
just opened minutes earlier. One that explained everything. One that would have stopped every single one of those words if they had only listened. I looked up at them, my chest tight, my voice barely there. "You think I'm difficult?" One that would have stopped every single one of those words if they had only listened. I looked up at them, my chest tight, my voice barely there. "You think I'm difficult?" I said quietly. "You have no idea what's been happening to me. Before I tell you what that report revealed, I need to ask you something. If you've ever felt misunderstood by the people you love, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? And if stories like this speak to you, consider subscribing, because this one changed my life in ways I never saw coming. My name is Liam Fletcher. I'm 62 years old, and for most of my life, I was the kind of man people described as steady. Not warm, not particularly charming, but dependable. I spent nearly 4 decades working as a structural engineer in Ohio. I believed in blueprints and measurements and things that could be tested and proven. If something cracked, you found the source. If something shifted, you reinforced it. Life made sense that way, or at least it used to. 5 years ago, I lost my wife, Margaret. We had been married for 36 years. She was the softer one between us, the one who remembered birthdays, who knew when our daughter Emily needed a hug before she even said a word, who could calm our son Daniel with just a look. Where I was rigid, she was understanding. Where I was quiet, she filled the silence. When she passed, the house didn't just become empty, it became unfamiliar. At first, I thought what I was feeling was normal. Grief isn't something you measure with a ruler. It doesn't follow a clean line. Some days I was fine. Other days, I found myself standing in the kitchen staring at the coffee maker, unable to remember if I had already made a pot or if I was just thinking about it. But slowly, things began to change in ways I couldn't quite explain. It started small. I would misplace my keys, not unusual, I told myself. Then I'd forget appointments. Then I'd walk into a room and stand there completely blank, trying to remember why I had gone in there in the first place. Again, I told myself it's just age. Everyone forgets things. But it wasn't just forgetfulness. There were moments, brief, sharp moments, when the world felt off. Too loud, too bright. I remember one afternoon at the grocery store. I was standing in the cereal aisle trying to decide between 2 brands I'd bought for years when suddenly the fluorescent lights above me felt like they were drilling into my skull. The hum of the refrigerators, the chatter of people, even the squeak of shopping carts, it all became unbearable at once. I had to leave my cart right there and walk out. I told no one, because what was I supposed to say? That the world had suddenly become too much, that I couldn't handle a grocery store anymore. Instead, I kept quiet. And that might have been my first mistake. Emily. My daughter noticed changes before I was ready to admit them. She's a nurse, always observant, always quick to pick up on details. At first, she would ask gently, "Dad, are you sleeping okay?" "Dad, have you been taking your medications?" I would brush it off. "I'm fine, Emily, just getting older." She would look at me for a second longer than necessary, like she didn't quite believe me, but she never pushed too hard. Daniel, on the other hand, wasn't subtle. "Dad, you're repeating yourself," he said once during dinner. "You already told us that story." I laughed it off, but inside something tightened. Rachel, his wife, was even less forgiving. "She gets overwhelmed easily," she once said about me, right in front of me as if I wasn't even part of the conversation. It's like walking on eggshells around him. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that I wasn't overwhelmed, that something was happening to me that I didn't understand. But every time I opened my mouth, the words felt wrong, out of order, like I couldn't quite grab them fast enough. So instead, I stayed quiet. Family dinners, which used to feel like the one thing holding us together after Margaret died, started to change. Emily would sit across from me, polite but distant. Daniel would check his phone more often than he looked up. Rachel would keep conversations safe, controlled topics that didn't require too much from me. And my granddaughter Sophie, she used to run up and hug me the moment I walked in. Now she hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than anything else. I remember one night in particular. We were all sitting around the table, and Sophie turned up the volume on the TV in the living room just a little. Not loud, just enough to hear her show over the sound of dishes. But to me, it felt like a siren going off in my head. "Can you turn that down?" I snapped. She didn't hear me. "Turn it down," I said again, louder this time. Everyone stopped. Sophie stared at me wide-eyed. Daniel frowned. "Dad, relax. It's not that loud." But it was. At least it was to me. I said, "Turn it down." I shouted louder than I intended. The room went silent. Rachel quickly grabbed the remote and muted the TV. Sophie looked like she might cry. And suddenly, I was the problem. Again. "I'm sorry," I muttered, pushing my chair back. I can't handle the noise sometimes." Rachel sighed under her breath. Daniel shook his head. Emily gave me that same look again. The one that said she was trying to understand, but wasn't quite getting there. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Not what I felt, but how they saw me. Difficult. Unpredictable. Too much. That word, difficult, started to follow me everywhere. In the way conversations stopped when I walked into a room. In the way plans were made without asking me. In the way Emily started calling before visits, as if she needed to prepare herself. I tried to adjust. I really did. I spoke less. I stayed home more. I avoided situations that might trigger whatever was happening inside me. But it didn't matter, because even when I was quiet, the label didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. "Dad's just not the same anymore," I overheard Emily say once in the kitchen. "Well, we have to deal with it," Daniel replied. "But he can't keep acting like this." Acting, that word stuck with me, because I wasn't acting. I didn't choose this, whatever this was. But at the time, I didn't have the words to explain it, and they didn't have the patience to listen. So little by little, I started to question myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was becoming someone difficult. Maybe this was just what aging looked like, losing control. Losing clarity, losing yourself piece by piece, while everyone around you quietly adjusted to the new version of you. The version they didn't quite like. The version they tolerated. And the worst part, I started to believe it. At first, I told myself it was just forgetfulness. That's what everyone says, right? You hit your 60s, you misplace your glasses, you repeat a story or two, nothing to worry about. Just part of getting older. But what I was experiencing didn't feel like normal. It felt unpredictable. Like my own mind had started slipping out from under me piece by piece without warning. There were days when I functioned just fine. I could read the newspaper from beginning to end, balance my checkbook, even call an old friend, and carry on a perfectly normal conversation. And then there were other days when I couldn't remember if I had taken my medication or not, even though the bottle was still sitting in my hand. Days when I would stand in front of the refrigerator staring at the open door, unable to remember what I had come there for, or worse, whether I had already eaten. It wasn't just memory. It was something deeper, something harder to explain. The headaches came next. Not the dull kind you can ignore, but sharp pulsing pain that seemed to come out of nowhere. Sometimes it would start behind my eyes like pressure building up slowly and then spread across my skull until even the slightest movement made it worse. Light made it worse. Sound made it worse. Everything made it worse. I started keeping the curtains drawn more often. I turned the volume on the television lower and lower until I could barely hear it. And still, sometimes it felt like the world was too loud. One afternoon, I tried to go back to the grocery store, the same one I had rushed out of weeks earlier. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I just needed to push through it. But the moment I stepped inside, it hit me again. The buzzing of the lights overhead, the echo of voices bouncing off the aisles, the distant beeping of a register, all of it layered on top of each other, until it felt like someone had turned the volume of the world all the way up, and I had no way to turn it down. My chest tightened. My hands started to shake. And suddenly, I couldn't think. Not clearly, anyway. It was like trying to grab onto a thought that kept slipping through my fingers. I abandoned my cardigan, walked straight out, sat in my car with my hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing like I had just run a mile. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think something I had been avoiding. This isn't normal. Something is wrong. But the moment that thought appeared, another one followed right behind it. What if it's just you? What if this is all in your head, because that's what everyone else seemed to believe? Especially Daniel. "Dad, you're overreacting," he said one evening after I snapped at the sound of his phone ringing. "It's just a ringtone." Just a ringtone. To him, it was a simple noise. To me, it felt like someone had slammed a door inside my skull. "I'm not overreacting," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's just loud." He gave me that look again, the one I was starting to recognize more and more. The look that said he didn't believe me. Emily was quieter about it, but not much more understanding. "You've been under a lot of stress since Mom passed," she said gently. "Sometimes our bodies react in ways we don't fully understand." That sounded reasonable, logical even. But it didn't feel right, because this didn't feel like grief. Grief is heavy, yes, but it's familiar. It's tied to memories, to loss, to longing. This felt mechanical, like something inside me was malfunctioning. I started writing things down. At first, it was just small notes, reminders to myself. "Take medication at 8 a.m. Doctor's appointment next Tuesday. Call Emily." But soon, the notes became something else. Records. Headache at 2:15 p.m. Couldn't tolerate noise at dinner. Forgot where I parked the car. I filled pages with observations, trying to find a pattern, trying to prove to myself more than anyone that this wasn't just imagination, that there was a reason behind all of it. But the more I paid attention, the worse it seemed to get. Or maybe I was just noticing it more. One night, I woke up in the middle of the dark, disoriented. For a few seconds, I didn't recognize my own bedroom. The walls felt unfamiliar. The shadows looked wrong. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of where I was. It took longer than it should have. Long enough to scare me. The next morning, I almost told Emily. I picked up the phone, dialed halfway, and then hung up, because I already knew what she would say. "You need to talk to someone, Dad." Meaning a therapist, not a doctor. Not someone who would look for a physical cause. Someone who would try to fix what they thought was happening in my head. And maybe they were right. Maybe this was all psychological. Maybe I was just struggling to cope, and this was how it was showing up. But then there were moments that didn't fit that explanation. moments like the one with Sophie. She had come over one afternoon while Emily was at work. We were sitting in the living room, watching one of her favorite shows. She laughed at something on the screen, the sound bright and innocent. And suddenly, that laughter felt like it pierced straight through me. Sharp. Too sharp. "Can you keep it down?" I said, trying to stay calm. She looked at me confused. "I'm not even loud, Grandpa." I said, "Keep it down." I snapped louder this time. Her face changed immediately. The smile disappeared. Her shoulders dropped. "I'm sorry," she whispered, reaching for the remote. The guilt hit me instantly. I hadn't meant to scare her. I hadn't meant to sound like that. But in that moment, I couldn't control it. Whatever was happening inside me, it was faster than my thoughts, stronger than my intentions, and everyone saw it. Not the confusion, not the pain, just the reaction, just the anger, just the part that made me look difficult. Later that evening, Emily pulled me aside. "Dad," she said softly, "you can't talk to her like that." "I didn't mean to," I replied. Something's wrong, Emily. I can feel it." She sighed, not impatiently, but not convinced either. "I know you're struggling," she said, "but snapping at people isn't going to help." There it was again. Struggling. As if it was something I could just manage better. As if it was a choice. I nodded because I didn't have the energy to argue. But inside, something shifted. Because for the first time, I realized something important. It didn't matter what I felt. It didn't matter what I was experiencing. To them, it all looked the same. And what it looked like was a man losing control of himself. I should have known something was wrong the moment Emily insisted we all have dinner at her house that Sunday. Not suggested, not casually mentioned. Insisted. "Dad, it's important," she said over the phone. "We all need to sit down together." There was something in her voice, carefully measured, almost rehearsed, that made my stomach tighten. But I agreed. Because that's what you do when your daughter tells you something is important. You show up. When I arrived, everything looked normal. Too normal. The table was already set. Rachel was in the kitchen finishing dinner. Daniel was pouring himself a drink. Sophie sat quietly on the couch, flipping through her phone. But no one smiled when I walked in. No one said, "Hey, Dad," the way they used to. Instead, there was this strange, heavy pause, like everyone was waiting for something to begin. I felt it immediately. That quiet tension in the air. "What's going on?" I asked, setting my keys down on the counter. Emily exchanged a quick glance with Daniel. That was when I knew. This wasn't just dinner. "Let's sit," she said, gently gesturing toward the table. We didn't start eating right away. No one reached for the food. No one made small talk. Instead, they all sat there looking at me, like I was the center of something I hadn't agreed to. Emily took a deep breath. "Dad," she began, her voice calm but firm. "We're worried about you." There it was, that word again. Worried. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Worried about what? Another glance between her and Daniel. Then Daniel spoke. "Your behavior," he said plainly. The word hit harder than I expected. Behavior, I repeated. "Yes," Rachel added quietly. "It's been difficult. Difficult. That word again. It seemed to follow me everywhere now, like a label I couldn't peel off no matter how hard I tried. I don't understand," I said, though a part of me already did. Emily leaned forward slightly, her hands folded together. "You've been forgetful, Dad. You've been snapping at people. You get overwhelmed over small things. It's not like you. I told you, I said quickly, my voice rising before I could stop it. Something is wrong. I've been trying to explain that. Or, Daniel cut in his tone sharper. Now you're just not handling things well. The room went still. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means, he continued, maybe this isn't a medical issue. Maybe it's emotional. Maybe you're not coping as well as you think you are. I felt something tighten in my chest. I lost my wife, I said, my voice low. I think I'm allowed to struggle a little. And we understand that, Emily said quickly. We do. But this isn't just grief anymore. Then what is it? I asked, frustration creeping in. Emily hesitated for just a second. And then she said it. I think you need to talk to someone, Dad. A therapist. There it was. Exactly what I had expected. Not a neurologist. Not a doctor looking for answers. A therapist. Someone to fix what they believed was broken in my mind. I don't need a therapist, I said firmly. Rachel sighed softly, shaking her head. Liam, this isn't just about you. Shh, he said. It's affecting everyone. Someone to fix what they believed was broken in my mind. I don't need a therapist, I said firmly. Rachel sighed softly, shaking her head. Liam, this isn't just about you, she said. It's affecting everyone. Affecting everyone. As if I had chosen this. As if I had decided one day to become someone they had to deal with. I'm not doing this on purpose, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I've told you, something is wrong. Dad, Daniel said, his patience clearly wearing thin. You keep saying that. But every time something happens, it's the same story. Noise is too loud. Lights are too bright. You forget things. You snap. You apologize. And then it happens again. Because I can't control it. I shot back. Silence fell over the table. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Emily looked at me, her expression soft but distant. That's exactly why we're concerned, she said quietly. And then she said the one thing I wasn't prepared for. Have you thought about maybe not living alone anymore? The words hung in the air like a weight. I blinked. What? Daniel leaned forward now. Maybe it's time to consider assisted living, he said. Somewhere you can have supervision, support. Support. Supervision. The words felt wrong in my ears. I don't need supervision, I said, my voice shaking now. Not from anger, but something deeper. I'm still capable of taking care of myself. Are you? Rachel asked gently. That question. It cut deeper than anything else. Because for a brief moment, I didn't have an answer. And they saw it. They saw that hesitation. And they took it as confirmation. Emily reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. We're not trying to hurt you, Dad, she said softly. We just want what's best for you, what's best for me. That phrase again, always said with good intentions, always sounding like a decision had already been made. I slowly pulled my hand away. No, I said quietly. Emily frowned slightly. No, I'm not going to therapy, I said, and I'm not moving into some facility. Daniel exhaled sharply. Dad, you're being stubborn. I'm being clear, I replied. You're being difficult, Rachel muttered under her breath. The word landed harder this time, because it wasn't just frustration. It was judgment. Final. Decided. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor louder than I intended. I came here thinking this was dinner, I said, looking at each of them in turn. Not whatever this is. Emily stood up slightly. Dad, please. No, I said again, firmer this time. You don't get to decide what's wrong with me without even trying to understand it. We are trying? Daniel started. No, I interrupted. You're not. My voice wasn't loud anymore. It didn't need to be. Trying would mean listening. I continued. Trying would mean believing me when I say something isn't right. No one spoke. Not Emily, not Daniel, not Rachel. And in that silence, I understood something I hadn't fully admitted to myself before. They had already made up their minds. About me, about what I was. Difficult, unstable, a problem to be managed, not a person asking for help. I looked at Sophie. She was watching everything, her eyes moving between all of us, unsure of what to do. For a second, I thought about saying something to her, something reassuring, but the words didn't come, because I wasn't sure I believed them myself anymore. So, instead, I turned and walked out. No one followed, no one called my name, and as I stepped outside into the quiet night air, one thought echoed louder than anything else. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am becoming someone they can't live with. After that night at Emily's house, something inside me changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a crack spreading through glass. I stopped calling, stopped dropping by unannounced, stopped trying to explain what I was feeling because every time I did it only seemed to make things worse. If they believed I was difficult, then maybe the best thing I could do was make their lives easier. By staying away. For a while, that almost worked. The house was quieter, predictable, controlled. No unexpected noises, no crowded rooms, no conversations where I had to defend myself. Just me and the slow creeping sense that something was still very, very wrong. Then Emily called. Dad, we're having dinner again this Sunday, she said. I think it would be good if you came. There was hesitation in her voice this time. Not firm like before. Careful. Almost hopeful. I should have said no. But I didn't. Because despite everything, they were still my family. And a part of me still believed maybe this time would be different. When I arrived, the atmosphere was lighter than before. Not normal exactly, but better. Rachel greeted me with a polite smile. Daniel gave me a quick nod. Emily hugged me briefly, but it was something. Even Sophie ran up to me again. Hi, Grandpa, she said, wrapping her arms around me. That alone was enough to make me stay. Dinner started off fine. Conversations stayed safe. Work, school, the weather. I kept my responses short, measured, careful not to say anything that might tip the balance, careful not to become difficult. For a while, I thought maybe I had it under control. Then it started. At first, it was just a faint pressure behind my eyes, barely noticeable. I ignored it, kept eating, kept nodding along to whatever Daniel was saying about his job at the bank. But the pressure grew, slowly, relentlessly. The overhead light above the dining table suddenly felt too bright. Not just bright sharp, like it was cutting through my vision. I blinked a few times trying to adjust. Dad, you okay? Emily asked. I'm fine, I said quickly, but I wasn't. The sound of silverware against plates started to echo. Every clink, every scrape, louder than it should have been. Rachel's voice, Daniel's voice, even. Sophie's quiet humming, all of it, layered together, until it felt like I was sitting in the middle of a storm. My heart began to race. I reached for my glass of water, but my hand wasn't steady. Dad. Rachel's voice. Daniel's voice. even Sophie's quiet humming. All of it layered together until it felt like I was sitting in the middle of a storm. My heart began to race. I reached for my glass of water, but my hand wasn't steady. "Dad," Daniel said, noticing now, "you don't look good." "I said I'm fine," I snapped sharper than I intended. The room went quiet. Too quiet. And somehow that made it worse, because now all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. High-pitched, relentless, like something inside my head was screaming. I pressed my fingers to my temple. "Can we turn that light down?" I muttered. Rachel frowned. "What light? This one. Relentless." Like something inside my head was screaming. I pressed my fingers to my temple. "Can we turn that light down?" I muttered. Rachel frowned. "What light? This one?" I said, pointing upward. "It's too bright." "It's the same as always," Daniel replied. "But it wasn't. Not to me. It's too bright," I repeated louder this time. Sophie shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Emily stood up slightly. "Okay, let's just—" And then the sound hit me, a fork dropping onto a plate. A small, harmless sound. But in that moment, it exploded in my head like a gunshot. Something inside me snapped. "Can you all just stop?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. The chair scraped loudly as I pushed back from the table. My hands shook. My chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself. "Everything is too loud," I yelled. "The lights, the noise, I can't." My words broke apart. Didn't come out right. Didn't make sense even to me. I grabbed the edge of the table, trying to steady myself, but my grip slipped. And suddenly, everything tilted. Plates crashed to the floor. Glasses shattered. Sophie screamed. I stumbled backward, knocking into the chair behind me before falling hard onto the ground. For a second, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor. The ceiling above me still too bright. Faces hovering over me, blurry, distorted. "Dad! Dad! Can you hear me?" Emily's voice urgent now. I don't... I tried to speak, but the words felt thick, tangled. Daniel stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "This is exactly what I was talking about," he muttered. Rachel pulled Sophie closer, shielding her. "It's not safe," she whispered. Not safe. Those words cut through everything else, because in that moment I realized they weren't scared for me. They were scared of me. Emily helped me sit up slowly. "You need help, Dad," she said, her voice trembling now, not with anger, but fear. "This isn't okay." "I know," I said weakly. "I told you, something's wrong." But even as I said it, I could see it in their eyes. They didn't hear what I was saying. They saw what had just happened, the shouting, the outburst, the broken dishes, the fear on Sophie's face. And to them, it all pointed to one conclusion. Not illness, not something physical. Just me, losing control. Daniel exhaled sharply. "We can't keep doing this." Rachel nodded. "This isn't normal." Emily looked at me, her expression torn, but her voice firm. "Dad, we need to get you evaluated, like I was a problem to be diagnosed, a situation to be managed, not a person trying to understand what was happening to his own body." I looked around the room, at the broken plates, at the spilled food, at my granddaughter clinging to her mother, eyes wide with fear, and suddenly, I didn't know which was worse. What I was experiencing, or the way they saw me because of it. "I didn't mean," I started, but my voice failed. Because how do you explain something you don't understand yourself? How do you defend something you can't control? You don't. You just sit there, on the floor, surrounded by the pieces of a moment that changed everything. And for the first time, I felt it clearly. Not confusion, not fear. Something else. Something heavier. They had stopped seeing me as their father and started seeing me as a problem. The house felt different after that night. Not quieter, not calmer, just heavier. Every room carried echoes of what had happened, the crash of dishes, Sophie's frightened voice, the look on Emily's face when she realized she couldn't control the situation anymore. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. Not just the moment I fell, but the way they looked at me afterward. Not with concern, not with understanding, but with something closer to resignation. Like they had finally accepted something they'd been suspecting all along, that I was no longer the man they used to know. By morning, I had made a decision, not out of confidence, not even out of hope, but because I couldn't keep living like this, caught between what I felt and what everyone else believed. I needed answers, real ones, not guesses, not assumptions, answers. I didn't call Emily, didn't tell Daniel. For once, I didn't ask for anyone's opinion. I got in my car and drove. The road to Cleveland felt longer than usual, not because of traffic, but because of the thoughts running through my head. What if they were right? What if this was all in my mind? What if I sat down in front of a doctor, explained everything, and they told me there was nothing wrong, that I just needed therapy? That I just needed to cope better? I almost turned around twice, but something stopped me. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was that quiet voice inside me that kept saying, "This is not normal." By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the clinic, my hands were already tense on the steering wheel. I sat there for a moment, staring at the building. Clean, professional, neutral. A place where things were supposed to make sense, or at least be explained. Inside, everything smelled faintly of disinfectant. The waiting room was quiet, soft music playing somewhere in the background, a television mounted on the wall with subtitles on. Even that felt almost too loud. I checked in, gave my name, and sat down. And then I waited. Every minute felt longer than it should have. I watched people come and go. Some calm, some anxious. Some looking just as lost as I felt. I wondered what they were there for, and whether any of them felt like their own body had turned into something they didn't recognize. Liam Fletcher. I looked up. A nurse stood at the doorway, clipboard in hand. I followed her down a narrow hallway into a small examination room. Blood pressure, temperature, basic questions, routine, predictable, safe. Then she said, "The doctor will be with you shortly," and left. I sat there alone, again. But this time, it felt different. Because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't being judged. No one was watching me for signs of being difficult. No one was waiting for me to snap. I was just a patient. A few minutes later, the door opened. "Mr. Fletcher," a calm voice said. I looked up to see a man in his 50s, glasses resting low on his nose, expression focused but not rushed. "I'm Dr. Harris," he said, extending his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, grounded. "Tell me what's been going on," he said, pulling up a chair and sitting across from me. Not behind a desk, not at a distance. Across. Like this was a conversation. And for a moment, I didn't know where to start. Because how do you explain something that doesn't make sense, even to you? I hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "I don't think this is just aging." He nodded once. "Okay," he said. "Tell me why." There was no interruption, no assumption, no immediate conclusion, just space. So I told him, Everything. The headaches, the noise sensitivity, the moments of confusion, the grocery store, the dinner, the way my family had started to see me. I even told him about the word. Difficult. He didn't react to that the way I expected, didn't dismiss it, didn't agree with it either. He just listened, really listened, occasionally asking a question not to challenge me, but to understand. How long have the headaches been happening? Do they come with visual changes? Any issues with balance or coordination? Each question felt precise, intentional, like he was mapping something intentional, like he was mapping something out in his mind. Not guessing, not assuming, looking. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Dr. Harris leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me not in a judgmental way, but in a way that felt out in his mind. Not guessing, not assuming, looking. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Dr. Harris leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me, not in a judgmental way, but in a way that felt analytical. Careful. "I'm glad you came in," he said finally. That sentence alone did something to me, because it was the first time anyone had said that. Not "you need help," not "you're struggling," just "I'm glad you came in." "You don't think I'm just overreacting?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. He shook his head slightly. "I think something is happening," he said, "and I don't think we should assume what it is without looking deeper." Something inside my chest loosened, just a little. "So, what do we do?" I asked. "We start with tests," he replied. "I'd like to run a full neurological evaluation. MRI, blood work, maybe some cognitive assessments." The words should have scared me, and part of me was. "But another part?" "We start with tests," he replied. "I'd like to run a full neurological evaluation. MRI, blood work, maybe some cognitive assessments." The words should have scared me, and part of me was. But another part felt relief, because finally, someone wasn't dismissing what I was experiencing. "We need to rule things out," he continued. "And if there is something going on physically, the sooner we identify it, the better. Physically, not emotionally, not in my head, physically." I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. He gave a small, reassuring smile. "Well, figure this out," he said. Simple words. But they landed harder than anything else I had heard in weeks. Because for the first time, I wasn't alone in this. For the first time, someone believed me. And as I walked out of that clinic later that day, appointment papers in hand, something shifted. Not everything. Not yet. The headaches were still there. The confusion hadn't magically disappeared. My family still saw me the way they did. But underneath all of that, there was something new. Not certainty, not answers, but something close. Hope. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Not fully, not freely, but enough to notice the difference. Dr. Harris hadn't given me answers yet, but he had given me something just as important. Doubt. Not doubt in myself. Doubt in the version of me my family had decided was true. And that alone was enough to change the way I walked out of that clinic. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I sat in my car for a long time, the appointment papers resting on the passenger seat beside me. MRI, blood work, neurological evaluation, real tests, real possibilities, not just assumptions. I picked up my phone more than once, thinking about calling Emily, thinking about telling her everything, about saying, "You were wrong, this isn't just in my head." But each time, I stopped. Because I knew how it would go. She wouldn't hear relief in my voice. She wouldn't feel reassured. she would hear resistance, denial, another excuse. So instead, I drove home, alone. The next day, Emily called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Hey, Dad," she said, her voice cautious. "How are you feeling?" There was something different in her tone. Not warmer, not softer, just careful. "I'm fine," I said. A pause. "You sure?" she asked. "I went to see a doctor," I added before I could second-guess myself. Silence. Then, "What kind of doctor?" "A neurologist." Another pause, longer this time. "Dad," she exhaled quietly. "Well, how would you do that without telling me I went to see a doctor?" I added before I could second-guess myself. Silence. Then, "What kind of doctor?" "A neurologist." Another pause, longer this time. "Dad," she exhaled quietly. "Why would you do that without telling me?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it was. "I didn't realize I needed permission," I replied. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly. If something's going on, we should be handling it together. Handling it. Like it was a situation. Like I was something to be managed. "I am handling it," I said. "That's exactly what I'm doing. You're jumping to conclusions," she insisted. "You don't even have results yet." "I'm not jumping to anything," I said, my voice tightening. "I'm trying to figure out what's actually wrong instead of pretending it's all in my head." "That's not what we're saying," she replied, but her tone had already shifted. Defensive now. "It's exactly what you're saying," I shot back. "Therapy, assisted living, difficult. That's what you see." "That's not fair," she said, her voice rising slightly. "We're worried about you." "Then start listening to me," I said. The line went quiet. For a moment, I thought she might actually hear me this time. But then she said something that made everything inside me go cold. "Daniel and I were talking," she began slowly, "and we think it might be a good idea to help you manage things for a while." "Manage what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Your finances," she said carefully. "Just until we figure out what's going on." There it was. Not concern. Control. "I don't need help managing my money," I said flatly. "It's not about what you need," she replied. "It's about making sure everything is stable." Stable. Another word that sounded harmless, until you realized what it really meant. "You think I'm unstable?" I said. "That's not what I said. You didn't have to." "Dad?" "No," I cut in, my voice sharper now. "You don't get to decide that I'm not capable just because you don't understand what's happening. We're trying to protect you," she insisted. "From what?" I demanded. "Myself." She didn't answer, and that silence said everything. Later that evening, Daniel showed up at my door, unannounced. I opened it already, knowing why he was there. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door behind him slowly. "I already talked to Emily," I said. "Yeah." He nodded. "She told me." He walked into the living room, glancing around like he was inspecting something, evaluating. "You've got bills stacked up here?" he said, picking up a piece of mail from the table. "I was going through them," I replied. "Were you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. That look again, that quiet doubt. "I've been handling my own finances for 40 years, Daniel. And things change," he said. The way he said it, like it was inevitable, like I was already past the point of being capable. "I'm not signing anything," I said firmly. "I didn't ask you to sign anything," he replied. "Yet." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, Dad, this doesn't have to be a big deal, he said. It's just temporary. Just until we figure things out. I am figuring things out, I said. I went to a doctor. A neurologist. He repeated as if testing the word. You really think this is something physical? I don't know what it is, I admitted. But I know it's not normal. And I know it's not something I'm choosing. He studied me for a moment, and then he said it. I think you're looking for something to blame. The words landed harder than I expected. I'm not blaming anything, I said quietly. I'm trying to understand. No. He shook his head. You're trying to avoid the truth. And what truth is that, I asked? That you're not the same anymore, he said. The room went still. Because that was the first honest thing anyone had said. Not wrapped in concern, not softened by careful wording, just direct. You think I don't know that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond, because he didn't need to. I feel it every day, I continued. Every single day, I feel something slipping, something changing. And instead of helping me figure out why you just decided what it must be, we're trying to help, he said again. No, I said. You're trying to control it. That word hung between us. Control. Because that's what it felt like. Not support, not understanding. Control. He looked away for a moment, and in that brief second, I saw something in his expression. Not just frustration, not just concern, fear, but not fear for me. Fear of what I might become. Fear of what he might have to deal with. And that was when I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about them, their comfort, their certainty, their need to explain something that didn't make sense, even if the explanation was wrong. I'm not signing anything, I repeated. Daniel nodded slowly. Okay, he said. But if things get worse, we're going to have to step in. Step in, as if I wouldn't have a choice, as if this was already decided. He left shortly after that, and once again, I was alone. But this time, it felt different. Not just isolated, not just misunderstood, cornered. Because now it wasn't just about what was happening inside my body. It was about what they were willing to do because of it. And for the first time, I realized something that scared me more than any symptom. If I didn't find the truth soon, I might lose more than just control of myself. I might lose my life as I knew it. Waiting is a strange kind of torture. Not loud, not dramatic, just slow and relentless. The kind that creeps into your thoughts when everything else is quiet. That's what the days after my appointment with Dr. Harris felt like. Slow, heavy, uncertain. I had my MRI scheduled, blood work done, cognitive tests lined up. All I had to do now was wait. And in that waiting, my mind did something I couldn't stop. It went backward, back through the last year, then the year before that, looking for something, anything, a moment where this all began. Because Dr. Harris had said something that stuck with me. We need to look for patterns. Patterns, that was something I understood, something I trusted. Patterns meant logic, cause and effect, something I could follow. So I sat at my kitchen table one morning, notebook open in front of me, flipping through the pages I had been filling over the past few weeks. Headaches, noise sensitivity, confusion, mood swings. I traced them back, day by day, week by week, trying to find the first crack, and slowly something started to emerge. Not clearly, Not all at once, but enough to make me pause. The symptoms hadn't started 5 years ago. Not when Margaret died. Not when I was grieving the hardest. They started later. Much later. About a year ago. Maybe a little more. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the page. A year ago. What changed a year ago? I closed my eyes, trying to picture that time. The house, the routines, the people. And then a memory surfaced. Small, almost insignificant, but it stayed. Emily, standing in my kitchen, holding a small orange prescription bottle in her hand. "You haven't been sleeping well," she had said. "This might help." I opened my eyes. My gaze dropped slowly to the notebook. My pen hovered over the page. Medication. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Why would I? Emily was a nurse. She knew what she was doing, or at least I believed she did. I remembered asking her about it. "What is it?" "Just something mild," she said. "Helps regulate sleep. Nothing serious." Nothing serious. I wrote it down. "Sleep medication started 1 year ago." My hand tightened slightly around the pen. I flipped through the earlier pages again, scanning dates, looking for the first mention of headaches, the first note about noise. The first time I wrote felt disoriented, and there it was. Not immediately after, but not long after either. A few weeks, maybe a month. That was all. I sat there staring at the pattern forming in front of me. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was something. Something I hadn't considered before. Something I couldn't ignore now. I pushed the notebook aside and stood up slowly, walking toward the medicine cabinet. I still had the bottle. I hadn't thrown it away. Why would I? I reached inside, moving past the everyday things, aspirin, vitamins, until my fingers closed around it. The same orange bottle. The label slightly worn now. I held it in my hand for a moment before reading it. The name meant nothing to me. Long. Complicated. The kind of word you trust simply because you don't understand it. I turned the bottle over, scanning the small print. Dosage instructions. Warnings. Side effects. My eyes moved slowly across the text, and then stopped. Dizziness. Confusion. Sensitivity to light. Headaches. My breath caught. I read it again, slower this time, as if maybe I had misunderstood, but the words didn't change. They stayed right there. Clear. Unmistakable. My grip on the bottle tightened. "No," I muttered under my breath. It couldn't be that simple. Could it? I walked back to the table, sitting down heavily. The notebook still open in front of me, the pattern staring back. Medication started. Symptoms followed. Not instantly, but consistently. Building, worsening. I tried to think logically, like I used to, one piece at a time. Could the medication cause this? Possibly. But Emily would have known that, wouldn't she? She wouldn't give me something dangerous. Not without checking. Not without warning me. Unless she didn't think it mattered. Unless she believed the side effects were minor. Temporary. Not worth worrying about. Or worse. Unless she saw the symptoms and chose to ignore them. The thought made my chest tighten. Not because I believed it fully, but because I couldn't dismiss it either. I picked up my phone, scrolled to Emily's name, hovered over the call button, and stopped. Because what would I say? "Hey, remember that medication you gave me? I think it might be causing everything." She would dismiss it, say I was overthinking. That side effects don't work like that I needed to trust her. And maybe she'd be right. Or maybe she wouldn't. I set the phone down. Because this time I didn't want opinions. I wanted facts. And Dr. Harris had said the results were coming soon. So I waited. Again. But this time, It felt different, because now I wasn't just waiting for answers. I was waiting to see if the truth would confirm something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. That what was happening to me wasn't just ignored. It might have been overlooked by someone I trusted. And that possibility sat heavier than anything else. Because if it was true, then everything my family believed about Mitt was happening to me wasn't just ignored. It might have been overlooked by someone I trusted, and that possibility sat heavier than anything else. Because if it was true, then everything my family believed about me, everything they called difficult, was never who I was at all. It was something happening to me, right in front of them, and no one saw it. The call came earlier than I expected. I was standing in the kitchen staring at that same orange bottle when my phone rang. Dr. Harris. For a second, I just looked at the screen. My heart started pounding, not from fear, but from something sharper. Anticipation. This was it. Answers, or the confirmation of everything I had been afraid of. I answered. Mr. Fletcher. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it now. Focused. Serious. Yes, I said, gripping the edge of the counter. Did you get the results? A brief pause. Yes, we did, he replied. I'd like you to come in so we can go over everything together. My chest tightened. That wasn't a good sign. Can you just tell me? I asked quietly. Another pause. Longer this time. And then, there are some findings we need to discuss carefully, he said. But I will say this, what you've been experiencing, it is not psychological. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not psychological. The words echoed in my mind like something breaking open. I knew it. I whispered more to myself than to him. I think you were right to come in, he continued. Can you make it in this afternoon? Yes, I said immediately. I'll be there. The drive back to the clinic felt completely different this time. Not uncertain, not hesitant. Every mile felt like I was getting closer to something real, something solid, something that would finally prove I wasn't imagining this. When I arrived, they took me back almost immediately. No waiting room this time, no small talk. Just straight into Dr. Harris's office. He didn't sit across from me like before. This time, he sat slightly angled, a file open in front of him, scans visible on the screen beside him. Liam, he said, his tone steady. I'm going to walk you through what we found. I nodded. My hands were clenched together, but I didn't realize it until that moment. Your MRI shows no signs of tumors, no major structural damage, and no indications of advanced neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's, he began. Relief hit first. Quick, sharp, but it didn't last, because his tone hadn't changed. There are, however, signs of neurological irritation, he continued. Your brain is reacting, not deteriorating. Reacting to what? I asked. He turned slightly, pulling up another set of results. Your blood work showed elevated levels of a particular compound, he said. One that is commonly associated with certain medications. My heart skipped. Medication. He glanced at me. Are you currently taking anything prescribed? Yes, I said slowly. A sleep aid. My daughter gave it to me about a year ago. What's the name? I told him. He didn't react immediately, but I saw it. That small shift in his expression. Recognition. Concern. That medication, he said carefully, can in some cases cause neurological side effects, especially with long-term use or improper dosage. I felt the room tilt slightly. Side effects like what I asked, though, I already knew. Headaches, he said. Sensitivity to light and sound. Cognitive disruption. mood instability, disorientation. Each word landed like a confirmation, like pieces falling into place. But I swallowed hard. That doesn't explain everything. Not like this. He nodded. You're right, he said. In most cases, side effects are mild, temporary. My chest tightened again. In most cases, I repeated. He leaned forward slightly. But if the dosage is too high, or if your body reacts more strongly than expected, those effects can become significantly more severe. Too high. The words hit differently. Are you saying I hesitated? My voice lowering. This is happening because of that medication? I'm saying, he replied carefully, there is a strong correlation between when your symptoms began and when you started taking it. Correlation. Not assumption, not dismissal. Evidence. And based on your test results, he continued, your system is showing signs of prolonged overstimulation consistent with a reaction to that drug. I sat there in silence because suddenly everything made sense. The timing, the symptoms, the way it had built slowly, not suddenly, like something being fed into my system over time. And if I stopped taking it? I asked. His expression softened slightly. Then we monitor, he said. Gradually, your system should begin to stabilize. Symptoms may reduce significantly or even disappear. Disappear. The word felt unreal. You mean I'm not losing my mind? I asked, barely able to say it out loud. No, he said firmly. You are not. Something inside me broke. Not in fear, not in pain, but in relief, so overwhelming it almost hurt. Because for weeks, months, I had been fighting something I couldn't prove, defending myself against something I couldn't explain. And now I had the truth. But then another thought hit me, harder than anything else. She gave it to me, I said quietly. Dr. Harris looked at me. My daughter, I added. She told me it was mild. Safe. He didn't respond immediately, because what could he say? She wouldn't. I stopped, because I didn't know how to finish that sentence. She wouldn't what? She wouldn't hurt me. She wouldn't make a mistake. She wouldn't ignore something like this. I didn't know anymore. I'm not saying there was any intent, Dr. Harris said carefully. But this is why medications should always be monitored by a prescribing physician. Intent. That word lingered, because whether it was intentional or not, the result was the same. Everything I had been experiencing, everything they had blamed on me was real. And worse, it had a cause that had been sitting in my own home, in my own hands, given to me by someone I trusted. I leaned back slowly, my mind racing, because now the story had changed. Completely. I wasn't difficult. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't losing control. I was reacting to something that should have been questioned, something that should have been noticed, something that... Liam? Dr. Harris said, gently pulling me back. I looked at him. You did the right thing coming here, he said. For the second time, those words landed. But this time, they meant something different. Because now, I didn't just have doubt. I had truth. And as I sat there, holding on to that truth, one thought rose above everything else. They were wrong about me, all of them. And now I had proof. I didn't call them, not Emily, not Daniel, not anyone, because for once, I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to defend myself. I didn't want to be interrupted, corrected, or dismissed. I wanted them to hear it, all of it, at the same time, So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I invited them over. All of them. Emily sounded surprised. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It is." That seemed to confuse her more than anything else. Daniel was more cautious. "What's this about?" he asked. "You see," I replied, and then I hung up. That evening, they arrived one by one. First Emily and Sophie, then Daniel and Rachel. The same people who had sat across from me weeks ago, deciding what was wrong with me. But this time, something was different. Not the room, not the table. Me. I wasn't uncertain anymore. I wasn't trying to convince them of something I couldn't prove. I already knew the truth, and they were about to hear it. We sat down. No dinner this time, no distractions, just silence. Waiting. "What's going on, Dad?" Emily asked finally. Her voice carried that same careful tone. Controlled. Measured. As if she was already preparing for something difficult. I looked at her, at all of them, and for a moment I saw it again. That quiet assumption behind their eyes. That expectation that whatever I said next would confirm what they already believed. That I was still confused, still unstable, still difficult. I reached into my pocket and placed the folded papers from the clinic on the table, between us. "What's that?" Daniel asked. "My test results," I said. That got their attention. Emily leaned forward slightly. "You already got them back?" she asked. "Yes." "And?" she pressed. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch. Let them feel it, the same way I had felt it for weeks. Before I say anything, I said slowly, "I want you to listen." All the way through. Daniel crossed his arms. Emily nodded once. Rachel said nothing. "I'm not losing my mind," I said. The words landed hard, clear, direct. No hesitation, no doubt. Emily's expression shifted slightly. "Dad." "I'm not finished," I said, not raising my voice but not giving her space to interrupt either. That alone surprised them, because I had spent weeks reacting, defending, explaining. This time, I was in control. "I saw a neurologist," I continued. "He ran tests, MRI, blood work, cognitive evaluation." Daniel glanced at Emily. Emily didn't look away from me, and she asked again more cautiously now. "And he confirmed something is wrong," I said. Rachel frowned slightly. "What kind of wrong?" she asked. "Physical," I replied. That word changed everything. You could see it. The shift. Subtle, but undeniable. Emily straightened slightly in her chair. "What do you mean?" she asked. I unfolded the papers slowly, carefully. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted them to see it. Every movement, every step. "This," I said, tapping the page, "is a report of elevated neurological activity. My brain is overstimulated, reacting to what Daniel asked." I looked at him, then at Emily, and finally I said it. "The medication." Silence, not the kind from before. This was different, sharp, heavy, unavoidable. Emily blinked. "What medication?" she asked. I held her gaze. "The one you gave me." That was the moment everything changed. Her expression didn't just shift, it cracked. What she stammered. "The sleep medication," I said. "The one you told me was mild, safe." "That doesn't make any sense," she said, quickly shaking her head. "That medication is commonly used." "It doesn't. It causes side effects. I cut in, headaches, Sensitivity? Confusion? That's not, she started again, but her voice faltered, because now she wasn't speaking with certainty. She was reacting, just like I had been. For some people it's mild, I continued. For others, it's not. Rachel looked between us. Wait, are you saying all of this, everything that's been happening, is because of that? She asked. I'm saying it started after I began taking it, I replied. And my test results show a reaction consistent with long-term exposure. Daniel leaned forward now. That doesn't prove anything, he said. It proves more than you ever gave me credit for, I shot back. The room went still again, because that was the truth. They hadn't asked for proof. They had already decided. Emily shook her head again, but this time slower. I would never give you something harmful, she said, her voice quieter now. I believed that, I said, and I did. But that didn't change what happened. But you didn't monitor it, I continued. You didn't check how I was reacting. And when I started telling you something was wrong, I stopped, because I didn't need to finish. They all knew. You told me I was difficult, I said. No one spoke. You told me I needed therapy. I continued. You talked about putting me in assisted living. Sophie shifted closer to Emily. Even she could feel it, the weight of what was being said. I wasn't imagining it, I said, my voice steady now. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't losing control. I looked at each of them, one by one. I was reacting to something real. Emily's eyes were glassy now. I didn't know she whispered. I know, I said. And that was the hardest part. Because it would have been easier if it was intentional. If there was someone to blame, someone to fight. But there wasn't. Just assumptions, missed signs, and the quiet damage that came from not listening. Daniel leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable. So what now? He asked. I exhaled, because for the first time I had an answer. I stopped taking it, I said. We monitor. The doctor says my system should stabilize. And if it doesn't? Rachel asked. Then we keep looking, I replied. But this time, the difference was clear. Not guessing, not assuming. Looking. Emily wiped her eyes quickly. I'm sorry, she said. The words were soft, fragile, but they were real. And for a moment, I didn't respond. Because an apology doesn't erase what happened. But it does something else. It opens the door to something different, to something better. I nodded slowly. I know, I said, and for the first time in weeks, the room didn't feel like a courtroom, or a diagnosis, or a place where I had to prove who I was. It felt like something else, something quieter, something honest. A beginning, but not the end, not yet. Because even though they finally saw the truth, there was still one thing left to face. What came after it? The house felt quieter after they left. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the kind that settles after something breaks, something shifts, something changes. I sat at the table long after the door closed behind them, staring at the same papers that had just changed everything. For weeks, I had wanted this moment, wanted proof, wanted them to finally see me. And now that it had happened, it didn't feel the way I expected. There was no victory, no satisfaction, just a strange, hollow space where anger used to be. Because the truth didn't just clear my name, it forced all of us to face something else. What we had done to each other along the way. The next few days were different. Emily called the next morning. Not cautious, not controlled, just quiet. "Dad," she said. "Yes." A pause. "I've been reading about that medication," she said. I didn't think." Her voice trailed off, and for the first time in a long time, she sounded unsure. Not of me, of herself. "I know I said, I should have checked," she continued. "I should have followed up. I thought it was harmless." "I believe you," I said again, and I meant it, because that was the hardest truth to accept. She didn't hurt me on purpose. She just didn't look closely enough. "I'm so sorry," she said. This time, the words didn't feel fragile. They felt heavy, real, carrying everything she hadn't said before. "I know," I repeated, but this time I added something else. "I just wish you had listened sooner." Silence filled the line. Not defensive, not tense, just honest. "I know," she whispered. That was the beginning. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to it. Daniel didn't call, not right away. That didn't surprise me. He had always been the kind of person who needed time to process things, to understand them in his own way. 3 days later, he showed up. No warning, no call, just like before. But this time, when I opened the door, he didn't walk past me. He stayed where he was, standing there, looking different. "I owe you an apology," he said. Straight to the point. That was Daniel. I stepped aside, letting him in. We sat in the living room, the same space where he had questioned me, doubted me, tried to take control. "I shouldn't have pushed you," he said, "about the finances, about everything." I nodded once. "You were scared," I said. He looked at me surprised. "I was," he admitted, "but that doesn't excuse it." No, it didn't, but it explained it. "I thought you were slipping," he continued. "I thought if I didn't step in, things would fall apart." And instead I said quietly, "You made me feel like I already had." He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, just nodded. "I know," he said. We sat there in silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just still. "I should have listened," he added. That word again. Listened. It seemed so simple. But it was everything. Because none of this would have gone this far if someone had just listened. "I should have trusted you," he said. I exhaled slowly, because that was the part that stayed with me the most. Not the labels, not the arguments, but the lack of trust. "I needed that," I said. "More than anything." He nodded again. "I know." And for the first time, I believed him. Rachel's apology came differently. Not in words, not at first. She showed up with Sophie a few days later. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," I replied. Sophie ran toward me immediately. "Grandpa," she said, wrapping her arms around me. I froze for a split second, because the last time I saw her, she was afraid of me, and now she wasn't. I hugged her back, carefully, gently. "How are you feeling?" Rachel asked. "Better," I said. "Still adjusting." She nodded. I didn't know what was happening," she said, "but I shouldn't have assumed the worst." No, she shouldn't have. But she did, just like the others, just like all of them. "I understand," I said, and I did, because fear makes people fill in gaps, even when they're wrong. I'm sorry, she added. This time, it wasn't quiet. It wasn't hesitant. It was direct. And that mattered. Because it meant something had shifted. Not just in me, in them. But healing isn't a straight line. It doesn't happen all at once. And even as things began to settle, there were still moments, small ones, subtle ones, where the past lingered. Like when Emily hesitated before handing me something fragile. Or when Daniel asked twice if I had taken my medication before catching himself. Or when Rachel watched a little too closely during conversations. They didn't mean to, but it was there. That doubt. That memory of who they thought I was. And I felt it. Every time. Not sharply, not painfully, but enough to remind me that trust, once broken, doesn't return overnight. At the same time, something else was happening. The headaches were easing. The noise wasn't as overwhelming. The light didn't feel like it was cutting through my skull anymore. Day by day, I felt more like myself. Not the version they remembered, but the version I knew I was. And that difference mattered. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just living, adjusting, recovering, reclaiming pieces of myself that had been buried under confusion and doubt. And slowly, they started to see it too. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to change the way they looked at me. Enough to shift the silence between us. Enough to begin something new. But even as that healing began, there was one question that stayed with me, one thought I couldn't fully let go of. Not out of anger, not out of blame, but out of something deeper. If I hadn't gone to that doctor, if I had listened to them instead of myself, how far would this have gone? And more importantly, who would I have become in their eyes? Because sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't what happens to you. It's what people decide it isn't to you. It's what people decide it means. Recovery doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't arrive like a switch flipping back to normal. It comes in small moments. Quiet ones. The kind you almost miss if you're not paying attention. The first time I noticed it, I was standing in the kitchen. The sunlight coming through the window didn't hurt. That alone made me stop. For weeks, even the softest light had felt like it was cutting through my head. But that morning, it didn't. I stood there longer than I needed to, letting it settle. Not rushing it, not questioning it, just noticing. Later that day, I drove to the grocery store. The same one. The same aisles. The same place where everything had once felt too loud, too bright, too overwhelming. I walked in slowly, carefully, like I was stepping into something fragile. But nothing happened. No sudden pressure in my head. No sharp noise breaking through. No confusion. Just normal. I picked up a basket, walked through the produce section, chose apples without second-guessing myself, read labels without losing focus. It shouldn't have felt like a victory, but it did, because this time I was in control. Not fighting my own senses, not trying to hold myself together, just existing. And that felt like everything. The days started to build on each other. Not perfectly. There were still moments, still small flashes of discomfort, still times when I had to stop and breathe, but they passed. They didn't take over. They didn't define me anymore. And with every day that got a little easier, something else started to return. Confidence. Not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself, but the quiet kind, the kind that comes from knowing your own mind again, from trusting your own thoughts, your own body, yourself. Emily noticed it first. She came by one afternoon watching me as I moved around the kitchen. "You seem different," she said. I smiled slightly. "I feel different," I replied. She nodded slowly. "I can see that." There was no hesitation in her voice this time. No doubt. Just observation. Real. Honest. "I've been talking to a doctor," she added. "About what happened. About the medication." I paused, not because I was surprised, but because I hadn't expected her to say it out loud. "What did they say?" I asked. "That I should have monitored it more closely," she admitted. "That even common medications can have serious effects if they're not handled properly." I nodded. "That's what Dr. Harris said too." She looked down for a moment. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," she said. "All the times you told me something wasn't right." There it was again, that word. Missed. "I told myself you were just stressed," she continued. "Or grieving. Or changing. Changing." That was the word they had all used, as if it explained everything. "I didn't want to believe it could be something I caused," she said quietly. I looked at her, because that was the truth. Not cruelty, not neglect, avoidance. It's easier to believe someone is changing than to accept that something is wrong. "I understand," I said. And I did, more than I thought I would, because I had almost believed it too. Daniel came by later that week. This time, he didn't look around the house, didn't check anything, didn't evaluate. He just sat down. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," I said. He nodded. "You look better." Simple, direct, no second layer, no hidden concern, just recognition. "I was wrong," he added after a moment. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I wanted to understand what he meant. "About you," he continued, "about what was happening." I leaned back slightly. "Yeah," I said. "You trusted yourself," he said, "even when we didn't." That was the part that stayed with him. Not the mistake, not the outcome. The fact that I had kept going. "I didn't have a choice," I said. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. I had a choice. To believe them, to give in, to stop questioning. And if I had, everything would have gone differently. "I'm glad you didn't," he said. So was I. More than I could explain. Rachel's change was quieter, more subtle, but just as real. She didn't watch me the same way anymore, didn't hover, didn't observe every movement. Instead, she talked, normally, like nothing needed to be monitored, like I didn't need to be managed. And that shift, that simple shift, meant more than anything she could have said. Even Sophie felt it. Children always do. She didn't hesitate anymore, didn't look at me with uncertainty. She just came to me, talked to me, laughed with me, like she always used to. And that more than anything else told me I was back. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to recognize myself again. Enough to feel like the person I had always been. But with that return came something else. Clarity. Not just about what had happened, but about what it meant. Because it wasn't just about a medication, or a diagnosis, or even the way my family had reacted. It was about something deeper. Something that stayed with me, even as everything else improved. How quickly people can decide who you are when they don't understand what's happening. How easily concern can turn into control. How fast trust can disappear when fear takes over. And how hard it is to get it back. even when the truth is clear, even when the evidence is undeniable. B, 'cause the hardest part of all of this, how fast trust can disappear when fear takes over, and how hard it is to get it back, even when the truth is clear, even when the evidence is undeniable. Because the hardest part of all of this wasn't the symptoms, wasn't the confusion, wasn't the fear. It was the moment I realized the people who loved me had stopped seeing me and started seeing something else instead. That doesn't disappear overnight. It fades, slowly, like everything else. But it stays, a reminder of what happened, of what almost happened, and of what could have been lost if I hadn't kept going, if I hadn't trusted myself, if I had accepted their version of me instead of fighting for the truth. And as I stood there one evening, looking out the window, the same sunlight now soft and steady against the glass, I realized something. I hadn't just recovered. I had learned something I wouldn't forget, something I would carry with me long after everything else returned to normal. Because sometimes the most important thing you can hold on to is your own voice, even when everyone else thinks you've lost it. There's a difference between things getting better and things being resolved. I didn't understand that at first, because on the surface, everything looked like it was improving. The symptoms were fading. The tension in the house had softened. My family was trying, really trying, but underneath all of that, there was still something unsettled, something unspoken. It showed up in small moments. The way Emily hesitated before giving advice. The way Daniel paused before asking questions. The way conversations sometimes drifted, then stopped. Like we were all carefully stepping around something we hadn't fully addressed. And the truth was, we hadn't. One Sunday afternoon, we all gathered again. This time, it wasn't planned. Emily had come by with Sophie. Daniel followed not long after. Rachel brought coffee. It felt normal, almost. We sat in the living room talking about ordinary things. Weather, work, school. The kind of conversation that fills space without touching anything real. And for a while, I let it happen. Because it was easier, safer. But then, Sophie said something that changed everything. "Grandpa?" she asked, looking up at me. "Are you sick anymore?" The room went quiet. Not tense, not sharp, just still. Waiting. I looked at her, at the innocence in her eyes, at the simple way she asked something none of us had fully answered. "I'm getting better," I said gently. She nodded, satisfied. But the adults in the room, we weren't, because her question wasn't just about my health. It was about what had happened, and whether we were really past it. I leaned back slightly, looking at all of them. Emily, Daniel, Rachel, and I realized something. If we didn't talk about it now, we never would. "We need to talk," I said. 3 words, simple, but heavy. Emily's shoulders tensed slightly. Daniel looked at me, already knowing this wasn't going to stay comfortable. Rachel set her coffee down slowly. "I know things are better," I continued. "I know we're all trying to move forward." They nodded, carefully. "But we never actually talked about what happened," I said. Silence. Not avoidance. Not this time. Just recognition. Because they knew I was right. "I need you to understand something," I said, my voice steady. "This wasn't just about a mistake." Emily's eyes dropped slightly. Daniel shifted in his seat. This was about how quickly all of you decided who I was? I continued. No one interrupted. This was about how fast concern turned into control, I added. Daniel looked down now, and how easily my voice stopped mattering, I finished. That was the hardest part to say, and the hardest part for them to hear. Emily spoke first. I didn't mean to. I know, I said gently but firmly. That's not the point. She stopped, because she understood. Intent wasn't the issue anymore. Impact was. You didn't mean to hurt me, I said. But you did. Her eyes filled slightly. Daniel exhaled slowly. Rachel stayed quiet. I was telling you something was wrong. I continued. Not once, not twice, over and over again. I looked at Emily. You heard me? I said, but you didn't listen. Then at Daniel. You saw me, I added, but you didn't trust me. Then Rachel. And you watched, I finished. But you assumed the worst. No one argued, because they couldn't. It was true. All of you thought you were helping, I said, but what you were really doing was replacing my reality with your own version of it. That sentence hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. Emily wiped her eyes. I didn't know what else to do, she whispered. I know, I said again, but that doesn't make it okay. Daniel nodded slowly. It doesn't, he agreed. Rachel finally spoke. We were scared, she said. I know, I replied, and I was too. That stopped them, because they hadn't thought about that. Not really. I was scared every day I continued. I didn't understand what was happening to me. I felt like I was losing control, and instead of having you with me in that, I paused. Because this part still hurt. You stood against me. No one moved. No one spoke. Because there was nothing to say. That was the truth. And we were all sitting in it now. I don't need you to be perfect, I said after a moment. I don't need you to always have the right answers. I looked at each of them again. But I do need you to trust me. That was it. Not control, not management, trust. Even when it doesn't make sense, I added. Even when you're scared, even when you don't understand. Emily nodded through tears. I will, she said. Daniel followed. I will too. Rachel's voice was quieter. But I will. And for the first time, it didn't feel like something they were saying to fix the moment. It felt like something they understood, because now it wasn't just about what happened. It was about what came next, about how we moved forward, together. Not over me, not around me, with me. Sophie climbed onto the couch beside me, unaware of the weight that had just lifted from the room. Can we watch something, she asked? I smiled. Yeah, I said softly. We can. And as the TV flickered on, filling the silence with something light, something easy, I realized something. This was the real turning point. Not the diagnosis, not the recovery, but this. The moment we stopped pretending everything was fine and actually faced what wasn't. Because healing isn't just about getting better. It's about understanding and making sure it doesn't happen again. After that conversation, something changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in a way that felt real. For the first time since everything began, we weren't pretending anymore. We weren't avoiding. We weren't stepping around the truth like it might break if we touched it. We had said it, all of it. And somehow that made everything lighter, not easier, but clearer. In the weeks that followed, life didn't return to what it was before. It became something else, something new. Emily started coming by more often, not as a nurse, not as someone checking on me, but as my daughter. She would sit at the kitchen table sometimes with coffee, sometimes just quietly present. We talked more, not about symptoms, not about medications, but about things we hadn't talked about in years. Memories. Her childhood. Her mother. She would have handled this better, Emily said one afternoon, her voice soft. I smiled faintly. Your mother had a way of seeing things before they became problems, I said. Emily nodded. I think I was trying to be like that, she admitted, trying to fix things before they got worse. And in doing that, I said gently, you skip the part where you listen. She looked at me, not defensive, not hurt, just understanding. I did, she said, and that was enough, because she didn't try to explain it away, didn't try to soften it. She accepted it. Daniel's way of repairing things was different. Less words, more actions. He stopped asking if I needed help with things I had clearly handled on my own, stopped offering to step in. Instead, he asked simple questions. Want help with this? Do you need anything? And when I said no, he accepted it. That mattered more than anything else he could have done, because it wasn't about control anymore. It was about respect. Rachel, too, found her own way back. She didn't try to revisit what she had said, didn't bring up the past, but she changed how she treated me. Not cautiously, not carefully, normally. And that normality, that quiet return to seeing me as I was its own kind of apology. Even Sophie noticed. Children always do. One afternoon, she sat next to me while I was reading. Grandpa, she said, you don't get mad at the TV anymore. I laughed softly. No, I said, I guess I don't. She tilted her head. Were you sick before I thought about that? About how to explain something so complicated in a way that made sense to her. I was dealing with something my body didn't and dealing with something my body didn't understand, I said finally. And now it does. Now I do, I replied. She smiled, satisfied, and went back to her book. That simple exchange stayed with me longer than anything else, because she didn't see me as difficult. Understand, I said finally. And now it does. Now I do, I replied. She smiled, satisfied, and went back to her book. That simple exchange stayed with me longer than anything else, because she didn't see me as difficult. She never really had. She just saw change, and now she saw it change back. But for me, the biggest shift wasn't in how they treated me. It was in how I saw myself. Because for a long time, I had questioned it, questioned my reactions, my thoughts, my reality. I had almost accepted their version of me. The difficult one, the unstable one, the one who couldn't be trusted with his own mind. That's the part that stayed with me the most. Not what they said, but how close I came to believing it. Because when enough people tell you something, when the people you love say it, it starts to feel true, even when it's not. And that realization, that understanding, changed something in me. Not in a defensive way, not in a distant way, but in a clear one. I didn't need to prove who I was anymore. Not to them, not to anyone. I just needed to know it myself. And I did. More than I ever had. One evening, as we all sat together again, this time, relaxed, unguarded, without tension, filling the space, I looked around the room, Emily laughing at something Sophie said, Daniel shaking his head, smiling, Rachel pouring drinks. It looked familiar, but it felt different. Not because everything had been fixed, but because everything had been faced. There's a difference. One hides what happened, the other learns from it. And we had learned, all of us, in different ways, at different times. But enough to move forward, not perfectly, not without memory, but with understanding. And that's what made it real. Because healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about remembering it and choosing to do better. Together. As the night settled in and the conversation drifted into something light again, I leaned back slightly, letting the moment settle. Not analyzing it, not questioning it, just being in it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't fully felt since before everything began. Peace. Not loud, not overwhelming, just steady. Like something inside me had finally found its place again. And as I sat there, surrounded by the same people who had once misunderstood me, I realized something. We hadn't gone back to what we were before. We had become something else, something stronger. Because now, we knew what could happen when we stopped listening. And more importantly, we knew how to make sure we never did that again. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you realize something is truly over. Not because someone says it is, not because everything suddenly becomes perfect, but because the weight you've been carrying is no longer there. For me, that moment came on an ordinary morning. No confrontation, no conversation, no dramatic turning point, just a normal day. I woke up before sunrise, not from discomfort, not from confusion, just naturally. The house was still, calm, peaceful in a way that felt different now. Not empty, not heavy, just still. I made coffee, the familiar routine, grounding me in a way it hadn't for months. The sound of the machine, the smell, the simple, predictable steps. Nothing felt overwhelming. Nothing felt out of place. And as I stood there holding that warm cup in my hands, I realized something. I wasn't checking myself anymore. Not wondering if something was wrong. Not waiting for the next symptom. Not questioning my own thoughts. I was just present. And that's when it hit me. This was what I had been fighting for. Not just answers, not just proof, but this quiet sense of being whole again. Later that day, Emily stopped by. She didn't knock. She never did anymore. "Morning," she said as she walked in. "Morning," I replied. She looked at me for a moment, really looked, not analyzing, not assessing, just seeing. "You look good," she said. I smiled. "I feel good." She nodded, a small smile forming. I can tell. There was no hesitation in her voice. No second guessing. Just certainty. And that meant everything. We sat together in the kitchen, the sunlight stretching across the table between us. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked suddenly. I knew what she meant. Everything that had happened. All the moments we couldn't take back. All the time, I admitted. She looked down. "I do too," she said quietly. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "I keep thinking about how close we came," she added. I exhaled slowly. Me too. Because that was the truth. Closer than either of us wanted to admit. Closer than we would ever forget. I don't think he'll ever stop feeling bad about it, she said. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see guilt. I saw growth. You shouldn't forget it, I said. She frowned slightly. Why not? Because forgetting means it could happen again, I said gently. She nodded slowly, understanding. But you don't have to carry it like a weight, I added. She looked at me again. And how do I do that? She asked. I smiled faintly. You learn from it, I said. And then you do better. Simple, but not easy. Still, it was enough. Daniel came by later that afternoon. This time, he didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't check anything, didn't hesitate. He just sat down and started talking about work. Normal, uncomplicated. And that was his way of showing me something. He trusted me completely, not cautiously, not partially, fully. Rachel followed with Sophie bringing dinner. We sat together again, just like we had so many times before. But this time, there was no tension beneath it, no unspoken questions, no lingering doubt, just conversation, laughter, life. At one point, Sophie leaned over and whispered something to Rachel, then looked at me. What I asked. She smiled. I told Mom you're back to normal, she said. The room went quiet for a second, not tense, not heavy, just still. And then I laughed, softly, because in her world, it was that simple. Something had been off. Now it wasn't. End of story. I think I am too, I said, and for the first time, I didn't question it. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone again. Same house, same silence. But it felt completely different now. I thought about everything that had happened, the confusion, the fear, the frustration, the way I had been seen, the way I had almost seen myself. And one thought kept coming, seen myself. And one thought kept coming back to me. Not about blame, not about mistakes, but about something deeper, something more important. How fragile perception can be. How quickly people can rewrite who you are. Back to me. Not about blame, not about mistakes, but about something deeper, something more important. How fragile perception can be. How quickly people can rewrite who you are when something doesn't make sense to them, and how dangerous that can become if no one stops to question it, including you. Because the truth is, the most important thing I held on to wasn't the diagnosis. It wasn't the proof. It wasn't even the recovery. It was the part of me that refused to disappear. The P-art that kept saying, this isn't right. Because the truth is, the most important thing I held on to wasn't the diagnosis. It wasn't the proof. It wasn't even the recovery. It was the part of me that refused to disappear. The part that kept saying, this isn't right. This isn't me. Even when everyone else believed it was. And that's what saved me. Not just from what was happening to my body, but from losing myself in the version of me that others created. As I stood by the window that night, looking out into the quiet street, I realized something else. This wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning, not of a new life, but of a clearer one. One where I trusted myself, listened to myself, and never again allowed someone else's certainty to override my own truth. Because sometimes the hardest thing to hold on to is your own voice. And sometimes it's the only thing that matters. What this experience taught me is something I wish more people understood, especially those who care deeply about their families. Sometimes, when someone we love begins to change, our first instinct is to fix it, to explain it, to control it. We label behaviors, assign causes, and try to restore what we believe has been lost. But in doing so, we can unintentionally silence the very person we're trying to help. The truth is, not every change is emotional. Not every struggle is psychological. And not every difficult moment means someone is losing themselves. Sometimes something real is happening beneath the surface, something that requires patience, curiosity, and most importantly, listening. Listening is not passive. It is an active choice to trust someone's experience even when it doesn't make sense yet. It is the willingness to say, "I don't understand, but I believe you." And that simple shift can make the difference between healing and harm. I also learned something just as important: never abandon your own voice. Even when others doubt you. Even when their concerns sound convincing. Even when you begin to question yourself. Because no one lives inside your mind but you. And if something feels wrong, it deserves to be explored, not dismissed. If my story resonated with you in any way, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt misunderstood by people you love? Or been in a situation where you weren't listened to when it mattered most? Leave a comment and share your experience. You never know who might need to hear it. And if this story touched, you don't forget to like and subscribe. It truly helps this channel reach more people who need these conversations. Also, I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Thank you for being here with me. Sometimes, the most painful experiences in life don't come from strangers, but from the people we trust the most. And often, it's not because they don't love us, but because they stop truly seeing us. When someone begins to change, it's easy for others to assume label and try to fix what they don't understand. But in doing so, they may unintentionally silence a voice that is quietly asking to be heard. The truth is, not every struggle is visible. Not every change is emotional. And not every difficult person is actually difficult. Sometimes they are simply unheard. This story reminds us of two powerful things. First, never underestimate the importance of listening. Real listening means setting aside assumptions and choosing to trust someone's experience, even when it doesn't make sense yet. That kind of listening can protect relationships, preserve dignity, and even change lives. Second, never lose your own voice. There may be moments when people doubt you. Moments when their certainty feels louder than your truth. Moments when you begin to question yourself. But in those moments, holding on to your inner voice is everything. Because no one else lives inside your mind, your body, your experience. You do. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to keep believing yourself when no one else does. If this message resonated with you, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt misunderstood or not listened to when it mattered most? Share your story in the comments. You might help someone else feel less alone. And if you enjoy meaningful stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and continue sharing stories that matter. Thank you for being here.